Hello Internet and welcome to the Collective Arcana. We are a channel all about tabletop gaming. My name is Wyatt and today we're going to be talking about Lost Omens Grand Bazaar. Hey everybody, I just wanted to say at the top, if you haven't already subscribed, it really helps the channel out. Go ahead and hit that button. And like as well. Once you get to the end of the video and decide if you like it or not, that'd be great. Share the link by all means. Anything you can do to spread the word about the channel, we do appreciate. So, Lost Omens Grand Bazaar is the latest book in the Lost Omens series for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. These tend to be, in case you don't know, the sort of lore-heavier books, the ones that are designed to tell you more about the setting and sort of deep dive in that. In theory. In practice, that's not always exactly the case, and I think that's a really great thing. And we're going to talk a lot about the things that I love most about the Lost Omens line in this video. It had been a while since I got to do a review for a Lost Omens book, and it just has been a stellar reminder of how good they are. What I'm saying is you're going to hear me fawning a lot about it, and I'm going to start right now. This book, like so many books in this line, is a real breath of fresh air. It is a very mechanically heavy book. It has lots of equipment and items and some other character options and things like that, but it's just there's a lot of crunch here, a lot of granularity, things that you can use in your game. But it's also not just that. This line does a really good job of balancing between mechanics and lore, or crunch versus fluff. And this book is no different. What could have been a very dry sort of experience of just tables and tables and tables of items and equipment descriptions and things like that. And if you've played other games that release these sort of splat books, you've definitely experienced that. You've seen these books like Ultimate Equipment and things like that. And yes, there's a little bit here and there to tell you about where you might find or acquire these items, or tell you, go in depth about any new rules introduced by the items. But rarely have we had something exactly like this, where this is, for all intents and purposes, a sort of Ultimate Equipment type book. And rather than release it as a rule book, something that is, the darker spine, their normal core line, they have released it as a, there's an interesting story on this, we'll get to it in a moment, but they have released it as this lore book, this GM tool. Instead of being a player tool, which is what item books inherently typically are, it is a GM tool. It is a book of stores and NPCs and shops that you can drop it directly into your game. Now, it's designed to go into the city of Absalom in the Galarian setting, and of course it fits very well there. But any of these shops could be dropped into pretty much any game setting or location within a setting that you're playing in at the drop of a hat. Very little adjustment is going to typically be needed. There are some that are very heavily sort of Absalom focused, but again, that's something that's not hard for you to admit. You can just make in your notes, Absalom equals, Gurgak, the city of spider legs. Whatever you need to do. So don't be afraid. Don't think that just because this is based in Galarian and Absalom specifically that you have to use them there. One of the things that I've said over and over about this line is that I, as a homebrew GM, I don't play in Galarian, I don't play in Absalom, is that I still use these Lost Omen books as much, if not more, than the rule books. The rule books really are still typically, for the most part, player-facing, whereas the Lost Omens lines tend to be, especially the Mwanga Expanse, was just plot hook. It was just a book full of plot hooks. Check out that review. I love that book. And this one is the same. Each of these shops has pre-made NPCs with their own motivations and personalities, and sometimes their own connections, and definitely always their own plot hooks and themes and things like that. So whatever town your players just stumbled into, odds are there's going to be a shopkeep that you can use in this book there, because they aren't just all generic, like, city stores, that would look fine lined up in a row. They sort of would, but that's not all they are. They are very thematic and very distinct from each other, and it's a really nice book and a really great way to do it, to make sure that it's getting the most use for the widest. And it's a business move, right? You want it to have as wide appeal as possible, and they nailed it. One thing I do want to say right now, if you look on the back here of this book, that is a really awesome looking dwarf samurai, it appears to be, I think. And I could be wrong. Maybe he's not a dwarf. Maybe he's just a little short and stocky. But if that is a dwarf samurai, I would like that miniature, please. Because it's dope. Anyway. Now, if you just are buying this for the items and equipment, don't worry. They do have tables and there's an index. And you can approach this from a very, I don't want to say boring, I want to say utilitarian mindset. And as a GM, honestly, I will often be doing that. But there's, just a much better way that they're presented where all of these items are specifically called out as being within certain shops. And look, even if you don't need necessarily shops, there's also 20 pre-made NPCs in here. As a GM, you gotta love that. Can't have enough NPCs. Especially because this is a very in-depth thing. Where we learn a lot about these NPCs, more than we would typically learn even in an adventure path, for all but the most important of NPCs. I mean, generally an NPC is lucky to get, a paragraph or two. These typically will get a page or more, not necessarily specifically about them, but their shop, the history of their shop, and plot hooks and things surrounding it. And that is really good. And again, when we do the Monsters and Myth Lost Omens book, it's the same thing. It's a similar thing where they took they took an item, an equipment splat book, and turned it into something much greater. The Monsters and Myth really does read like a bestiary or monster manual type book, dialed up to 11 to give you just so much extra that you probably don't need for every monster, but it's definitely really nice to have for a few monsters. So what exactly is in it? Well, it adds loads of new loot, including new weapons, armor, runes, consumables like ammo and alchemy items, as well as all new runes that attach not to armor or weapons, like a whole new category of runes. And it's going to allow you to get a lot more customization out of how you equip your character. It's a very nice change, very cool. Surprising that it's sort of almost snuck in this book when it's actually a pretty big change to how runes work in the system. So definitely a great thing to see. And it gives me a lot of hope for how we're going to potentially see changes come in the future to 2nd edition. The fact that they were so confidently able to just add this whole new genre of runes really gives me a lot of hope for what they're going to try next in terms of change-ups and things like that. And we're also going to get more vehicles and gadgets, as well as some assistive items and new materials as well. So all that's really good. This is a great companion piece. I think I sort of mentioned it in the Guns and Gears, but this is a great companion piece to that. Between those two books, I think we probably have just about doubled the number of items available for characters to loot and purchase and craft in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. And that is... that's a mean feat. There's a lot of really cool stuff now. There are a large number of vehicles. There are a large number of new materials, and the assistive items are just really great to give representation and allow players to make characters that match them in some way and get that representation and be seen. And that's just a good thing. And a lot of times they're very mechanically interesting as well. So it's just a double bonus there. I'm really excited to see, how these items are going to affect the next characters that my players build and things like that. So it's very exciting. We also got a bit of a surprise. We got the Poppet ancestry, which is little possessed, sort of, for lack of a better term, little dolly constructs. And that's pretty cool. What's even cooler, in my opinion, is that you can, in fact, one of the heritages that it comes with is for stuffed animals. And so for those of you playing your Pathfinder character bingo at home, you can go ahead and check off the box for Care Bears, because we can make Care Bears now. We also get several new familiars, and with that comes And these are the specific familiars. If you're not familiar with how familiars work, I think we have a video on that coming out, if we haven't already. But yeah, so if you're not familiar with familiars in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, they tend to just be sort of, whatever you want them to be. And here are these abilities. But there are some really specific ones that are not sort of generic creatures. And they have certain requirements. So we're getting a few new ones there, and we're also getting a whole lot of new master and familiar abilities. These are the things that you get to choose at the beginning of the day. They're the benefits that you and your familiar share for being so closely bonded through your magic. So more options there that's more power for casters that have familiars, and that's not a bad thing at all. More tools is always better, and I really like that, and I hope to see, because we got I think like a couple dozen new master and familiar abilities. Some of them are specific to those specific familiars, but most of them aren't. And that's really neat to get just that many at once in what was seemingly an item book. Same for animal companions. We got several new ones of those, including my personal favorites are a moth. Awesome, right? Yeah. And then also there's animated furniture. Specifically beast chairs, which are they're sort of like wheelchairs that have that are like living sentient construct pets, sort of, and that's super cool. And that means that you could be a beastkin prince and have a pet / chair that is alive, so you can be Beast from Beauty and the Beast now. So go ahead and check that also off of your Pathfinder bingo card. We also got a small handful of new archetypes. These were supposed to be originally in the Advanced Player's Guide, I believe, and they just sort of ran out of room, and they definitely feel like they should be in the Advanced Player's Guide. What I mean by that is they feel pretty fundamental and like things that I definitely feel like, oh yeah, finally we have these. Even though I didn't necessarily know we needed them, I definitely, now that I know they exist, realized how sorely they were missing. So the first is the Captivator, and it's all about giving you innate spells functionally that scale a little bit better than normal, and sort of playing with that innate spell mechanic that is, mostly underused except for like ancestries and stuff. And so this is really cool because, like I said, it sort of scales them with you, but it's not spell slots. It's a very unique sort of casting thing. One of my players is picking it up in our free archetype game on their Oracle. Very fitting with the theme of the character, and it's very similar to the 3.5 Beguiler, sort of in the feel and the way that they sort of have tailored the spells that you're getting access to and the feel of it. But mechanically, it's just very strange. Again, especially for 2nd edition, that hasn't made a lot of use of those innate spells really yet. So it's very exciting to see, and I do hope we see more of them in different genres than just that sort of illusion controller type of a vibe. It really opens up some new avenues for characters, beyond, even more than just sorcerers feeling like they have innate spells. These are really, really innate spells. The Wrestler gives us a new fighting style archetype to go with like the Mauler and the Archer and things like that. These are great. If you're not familiar, these are these sort of archetypes that you can just attach onto your base class in case you wanted to go with a certain play style, but you didn't necessarily want to multi-class into, another. So let's just, as an example. So here's a great example in this one. It gives a lot of great new actions around grappling. One of them is Whirling Throw. And Whirling Throw already existed in the APG. It was given to monks, and it's one of my favorite feats. You just throw someone away. And with not a lot of ways to do forced movement in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, it's a very cool feat, very useful. Situationally, it could be instant death, really, for the poor unfortunate that you grab hold of. And it's just a really nice new tool to add to your toolbox, both for your character personally, as well as the party in general, to just have this chance to just toss somebody around and get them into an area effect or get someone out of an area effect, as it may be. So it's really cool. And it's something that Monk has, but they don't get it until level 6, which means if you're doing a multi-class, you can't get it until you're twice that level. You only qualify for multi-class feats up to half your level. So you'd have to be level 12 to take that level 6 feat. But the way these fighting style feats are, you get access to it at level 8. So a monk would still get access to it first, right? They're still, generally speaking, going to be more naturally gifted than your, say, ruffian rogue who picks up this wrestler archetype. But you're still going to get access to it at level 8 instead of level 12, that whirling throw feat. So, and that's sort of how these work. It's a more curated, smaller thematic list of feats for people who don't want to go all the way into monk. You don't have to worry about the flavor and mechanics of being a sort of wise and studied practitioner. You just want to be able to drop, elbow drops from the top turnbuckle. You would go with wrestler. You get access to the most thematic things a little sooner than you would with the multi-class, and on a character that normally wouldn't have access on their own. And that's really great game design, and I hope they never stop making these. Finally, let's talk about another thing that I hope they never stop making. The third archetype that we got is the Spell Trickster, and it's a dedication that essentially allows players to take feats that sort of modify, not necessarily directly buffs spells that they can cast, though sort of kind of in effect, yes. But it's much more about versatility in those spells and changing some mechanics of how they work so they are situationally better but not inherently all the time better. But you have the choice of when to use the base version or your modified version. Now, what's really cool about this, already that sounds really cool. I know there's a few different ones for Fireball, for example, to change the rules around Fireball. Already that's very cool. But they specifically say in the book that if you want to as a GM, you can feel free to just let any spellcaster take any of these Spell Trickster feats without the dedication, as long as they have access to the spell that it's modifying. And that is so, so good. A lot of people in 2nd edition complain about the fact that for most spellcasters, there's not a lot of the real customization comes from the spells that you choose, and maybe one or two subclass options and things here and there. And I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that there are a lot of good feats for spellcasters. They are just very specific, and if you're not fitting if you're not fitting the exact mold of what they expect your wizard should be doing or your cleric should be doing, it can certainly feel like there's not a lot of options. This really opens it up pretty wide, especially when you take into account that most spellcasting classes, I think there are a few that don't, but most spellcasting classes do have some limited options to sort of cherry pick a spell or two from other spell lists. And so combining that with this can really go a long way to helping you customize how your spellcaster casts spells and how they interact with their spells in a way that is just very thematic and cool potentially for your character. It could just be another tool that you use, but hopefully if you're really you're taking possibly a feat to get access to the spell, and then taking another feat to modify the spell. You're investing a lot, and hopefully you would roleplay that out. But even if you don't, just having these extra tools there for spellcasters to feel like they can customize their playstyle in the same way or a similar way to how a fighter or another martial might take special strikes and things like that. That feels really good, and it feels like something that the system desperately, I don't want to say desperately necessarily, but definitely did need. And so this is a huge, huge thing, and if you're a GM, I'm going to recommend please let your players have access to these without the dedication. By all means, allow the dedication as well if that's what they're into. If they plan to take more than a couple of those feats, they probably should. But either way, giving access to that, can't recommend it enough. Now, if you're a player, don't hound your GM about it. I think it's a great idea. If they don't, that's okay. It's always going to be their call at the end of the day. But I personally, just like the free archetype, I don't see me ever running a game and not allowing my players to choose that. And that's it for the Grand Bazaar. Once again, I find myself passionately recommending a book that on the outside looked like it was going to be a lore book for a setting that I don't play. These Lost Omen books are just stellar, and the mindset that they're going into is very similar to the one that they're moving into with the rule books now, where it's not just necessarily going to be what other editions of the game would have had it be. They're going to be these very thematic, but all-encompassing sort of massive appeal books. That's, as I said before, that's really good for business, and it's also really good for you as the consumer of the product, as the player, as the GM, as the person who's buying it. Because in addition to the thing that you're buying it for, you're also going to find a lot of other stuff that you weren't expecting, and a lot of stuff that's going to be very exciting once you discover it. I can't recommend them enough. So check out this book. Archives of Nethys, of course, will have most of the items and everything. But for the NPCs, for those shops, for the lore and the plot hooks, you're going to have to get the book. That's the only place you can find them. And they're definitely worth the price of admission. So come down to the comments or head over to our Discord and let me know what are your favorite items from this book. What has you most excited? Was there anything in there that made you instantly have a new idea for a character, or just what did you see in there that you really want to build off of? I, as a GM, having access to all these new vehicles, I definitely feel like I need to run some sort of a vehicle chase soon, and that's something that I don't think I've ever run in a fantasy RPG before necessarily, just because I didn't feel like I had the tools. I've run it in more modern type games, of course, but very excited to see how it plays out in a otherwise traditional fantasy setting. And so that's my personal. But what are you excited about? What do you want to see? Down in the comments, or like I said, come hang out in our Discord. We got a lot of great folks over there, and we'd love to add you to our collection. So, all right, that's it. Thanks for watching. Welcome to the Collective, and we will see you next time. Bye.